You already know the moment. A table, 6 or 7 people talking at the same time. Coffee cups, laptops half open, someone tapping a pen against the table as if noise itself proves they belong there. And you. You're not speaking, not because you have nothing to say, not because you're shy. You're simply watching. The others fill the space immediately. Words collide. Opinions stack on top of each other. Someone interrupts someone else and laughs to smooth it over. Another person talks faster, as if speed itself creates authority. And every few seconds, someone glances at you, just for a moment. A quick look. Then they continue speaking. At first you assume the glance means nothing, but it does, because something about silence inside a group is never neutral. You believe people categorize you as quiet, maybe introverted, harmless. That would be the comfortable explanation. But in hierarchical environments, comfort rarely explains behavior. Machiavelli understood something about human gatherings that most people never articulate. Speech signals alignment. When people speak, they reveal where they stand, who they support, who they oppose, who they are trying to impress. Conversation is not just communication, it is positioning. Now return to that meeting table. Someone makes a proposal. Another person immediately agrees. A third person adds a modification. The rhythm of agreement builds a small alliance in the room, and then the pattern breaks. Because you are still silent, for a brief moment, one of them looks toward you, not because they expect you to speak, because they need to know something else, whether you approve. You never said you had power in the room, but silence removes the signal that normally allows others to measure their safety. And when that signal disappears, people begin to compensate. You notice the first small shift later, not during a meeting, during something casual, a hallway conversation. A colleague begins explaining a simple decision they made earlier that day. You only asked a short question, but after you stop speaking, you don't immediately respond. Just a pause, 2 seconds, 3. Something strange happens. They keep talking. Extra details appear. Unnecessary justification. The explanation becomes longer than the original action required. You didn't ask for clarification. You only allowed the silence to remain, and the other person tried to fill it. Most people believe silence communicates uncertainty, but that interpretation is comforting and wrong, because uncertainty usually triggers dismissal. Yet that is not what happens around you. Something else begins to emerge. Another gathering. Different people. Someone tells a joke at the expense of a coworker. The group laughs immediately. Loud, confident laughter. Then something subtle interrupts the moment. One person looks at you. Not long, just long enough to see your reaction. You did not react. The laughter fades a second earlier than expected. The joke teller suddenly adds a sentence. Obviously, I'm just kidding. No one asked them to clarify, but they did, because silence creates an interpretive void, and human beings cannot tolerate interpretive voids inside social hierarchies. They need signals, approval, disapproval, loyalty, submission. Conversation normally provides these signals constantly. Nods, smiles, verbal agreements. Each reaction helps the group maintain its invisible order. Machiavelli wrote about courts where nobles survived not by honesty, but by careful signaling gestures, words, timing. Everyone watched everyone else, not for truth, for alignment. Now imagine removing the signal entirely, not arguing, not agreeing, not laughing when laughter is expected, just observing. Dominant personalities rely on predictable reactions to maintain their position. They speak, others respond. The hierarchy stabilizes, but silence disrupts the calibration process. The dominant speaker cannot determine whether you are ally, threat, or witness, and uncertainty inside hierarchy is dangerous. You may believe you are simply quiet, but the group rarely experiences it that way. They experience an absence, and absence forces interpretation. That is why explanations around you grow longer. That is why jokes receive sudden clarifications. That is why certain people glance toward you before finishing a sentence. You are not controlling this. You are not even intending it. But the effect already exists, because inside human groups, perception moves faster than intention. Before you decided who you are in the room already decided what your silence means. And the most unsettling part is this: you still think you are simply observing, but the group has already begun adjusting itself around you. A project meeting begins the same way most professional gatherings do. Slides appear on the screen. Someone clears their throat and begins explaining the plan. The room immediately divides into familiar roles. One person interrupts with suggestions. Another challenges the numbers. Someone else rushes to support the presenter before the criticism becomes too strong. The pattern looks like debate, but debate is rarely the true function of these moments. What you are watching is status maintenance. People speak quickly because speaking early creates the illusion of ownership over the discussion. Whoever establishes momentum first appears influential, even when the idea itself is ordinary. This is why voices overlap. Influence, most believe, belongs to whoever talks the most. Now observe what happens when that rhythm encounters silence. The presenter finishes the explanation. A few people respond immediately: questions, small critiques, supportive comments. Then there is a pause. Not long, just long enough for someone to look at you. You don't nod, you don't frown, you don't speak. Your expression remains neutral. Something subtle shifts in the room. The presenter begins speaking again. No one asked a new question, but the explanation suddenly expands. They start clarifying numbers that were already clear. They defend assumptions no one challenged. They repeat the logic behind decisions that had already been explained. The presentation becomes longer, not stronger, longer. Because authority inside a professional hierarchy relies on a feedback loop. The speaker presents confidence. The room signals acceptance. Nods, short agreements, quick reactions. Those signals stabilize the speaker's position. But when one person removes their signal entirely, the loop breaks. And once the loop breaks, uncertainty spreads. You see it again later. A colleague presents a small plan for the next phase of the project. Nothing controversial. The room reacts politely. Then they look toward you. You remain silent. The moment stretches. 2 seconds. 3. Their posture changes almost imperceptibly. They begin explaining the plan again, but now the tone is different. More detail, more justification. They are no longer presenting. They are defending. The agitation is small, but visible. Because silence does something most professionals are not prepared for. It removes confirmation. Dominant speakers rely on the room to stabilize their authority through reaction. Agreement reassures them. Opposition clarifies the battlefield. But silence offers neither. It is an empty surface. And ambitious people cannot tolerate empty surfaces, so they speak more, they reveal more, they expose the motives behind their certainty. Machiavelli observed that power rarely exposes itself voluntarily. It must be pressured. And pressure does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from absence. The meeting ends. Chairs slide back. Laptops close. Conversations scatter into small clusters in the hallway. You walk past 2 co-workers speaking quietly near the doorway. They lower their voices slightly when you pass. I can't tell what he thinks. Yeah, he didn't react to anything. A pause. I wonder if he disagreed. Neither of them knows. You never told them. Inside the meeting, everyone else revealed their position within minutes. Agreement, opposition, ambition. But you declared nothing, and because you declared nothing, something unusual happened. You left the room knowing exactly where everyone stands, while they are still trying to figure out where you do. The same pattern appears outside professional rooms, a crowded living room, music low enough for conversation, loud enough to prevent silence from feeling comfortable. Someone begins telling a story. She describes a moment from work, something awkward, slightly dramatic, designed for an audience reaction. As she speaks, people around her respond exactly as expected. Small laughs, quick questions, short affirmations. These responses guide the rhythm of the story. Every storyteller relies on signals like this. They indicate when to exaggerate a detail, when to pause, when to move to the next part of the narrative. Approval shapes the performance. You are standing nearby when her eyes briefly reach you. You are listening, but you do not offer the signals. No laughter, no quick comment, only attention. At first, nothing changes. The story continues, but after a moment, the rhythm shifts. She adds another detail that wasn't necessary, then another. The explanation grows slightly longer than the story required. Most people assume attraction emerges from active engagement, clever remarks, quick humor, constant conversational energy. That belief comforts talkative men, because it makes the interaction predictable. Say something entertaining, receive approval, maintain momentum, but remove the approval cues and something more interesting happens. Later in the evening, the conversation moves into a smaller circle. 4 people talking. Someone asks a casual question about travel. She answers first, describing a place she visited last year. Again, the others respond immediately. You do not. You listen. When she finishes speaking, your silence leaves a small gap in the exchange. For a moment, she holds eye contact with you. The pause stretches, not uncomfortable, but unresolved, so she fills it. She adds another thought about the trip, how the city felt at night, how strange the streets looked after midnight. You never asked for more detail, but the silence invited expansion, because silence inside conversation creates interpretive ambiguity, and human beings instinctively attempt to resolve ambiguity. Machiavelli understood that uncertainty alters behavior more effectively than confrontation. When intentions are unclear, people begin projecting explanations onto the unknown. Now the interaction subtly rebalances. She begins directing more comments toward you, small adjustments in posture, a question asked slightly more directly, not dramatic, just noticeable. The person seeking attention begins calibrating the interaction again, trying to recover the familiar feedback loop that stabilizes social control, but the loop never fully returns. The conversation continues around you, yet something different has already formed. Later that night, as people gather their jackets and step outside into the cold air, you hear part of a conversation behind you. 2 friends speaking quietly. Who's that guy? I don't know, he seems mysterious. Nothing about you changed during the evening. You told no dramatic stories. You displayed no calculated charm. You simply allowed silence to remain where most people rush to fill it. And in that absence, something unexpected appeared. Psychological depth. Not because you declared it, because others constructed it themselves. The same disturbance appears in friendship circles, not during dramatic conflicts, during something smaller. A table at a cafe, 4 or 5 friends leaning back in their chairs, phones on the table, conversation drifting from one topic to another. Eventually, the talk reaches a familiar territory. Someone who is not present, a friend who canceled plans earlier that week, a coworker who annoyed someone yesterday. The tone becomes casual. Gossip rarely announces itself directly. It enters conversation disguised as humor or harmless commentary. One person begins describing the absent friend's behavior, another adds a detail. Soon, the group is building a shared narrative about someone who is not in the room. This ritual serves a purpose. Most people believe loyalty is demonstrated through agreement. If the group criticizes someone, you join the criticism. If the group laughs, you laugh with them. Participation signals belonging. Alignment proves you are safe. Now notice what happens when that signal disappears. You are listening to the conversation, but you do not add anything. No agreement, no disagreement, just observation. At first, the rhythm continues normally. Someone makes a sharper remark about the absent friend. Another person laughs. Then someone glances at you. Your reaction never arrives. The moment is brief, but something changes, because gossip depends on shared participation. It only feels harmless when everyone confirms the same emotional position. Without confirmation, the tone becomes uncertain. The next comment about the absent friend arrives more cautiously. Someone adds a quick clarification. "I mean, you know how he is." The conversation slows slightly, not because anyone was challenged, because the group lost a signal. Later, the pattern repeats more clearly. Someone tells a joke about a mutual friend who always arrives late to gatherings. The joke is sharper than usual, the kind meant to provoke laughter. Two people laugh immediately. You do not. You simply look at the speaker. No smile, no reaction. The laughter fades faster than expected. The person who told the joke quickly adds another sentence. "I'm just kidding, obviously." No one accused them of cruelty, but something about the silence created a different atmosphere. Machiavelli wrote that power inside groups depends on the perception of safety. People behave boldly when they believe their actions will be supported or ignored. Silence removes both guarantees. Without laughter, criticism feels exposed. Without agreement, mockery begins to look like risk. So the group begins adjusting its behavior, not dramatically, just enough to regain certainty. The conversation eventually moves to another topic. Phones appear, drinks arrive. The moment dissolves, but the uncertainty does not. Later, when the gathering begins to break apart and people step outside one by one, a friend walks beside you for a few moments. They hesitate slightly before speaking. "Hey, what did you actually think about that earlier?" You ask what they mean. "The stuff we were saying." Their voice lowers. "About him. You never expressed judgment. You never defended anyone. You only allowed the conversation to unfold without joining the ritual. But something about that absence changed your position in the group. Because loyalty rituals depend on visible participation. Agreement proves allegiance. Laughter proves alignment. You provided neither. And now the group is left with a quiet problem. They still know exactly what they said, but they do not know what you decided to remember. Eventually, the tension begins to soften, not because the dynamic disappears, because people find a comfortable explanation for it. They decide your silence means something simple, harmless, passive. The shift happens gradually. At work, conversations start flowing more freely around you. The guarded tone that once appeared when you were nearby fades. People stop watching your reactions as closely. Meetings end, and small clusters form in the hallway. You stand there while coworkers talk openly about decisions made earlier in the day. Someone complains about how a project is being managed. Another person agrees and adds a detail about the manager's habits. No one lowers their voice. No one checks your expression. Because the group has reached a convenient conclusion. If you never speak, you must not matter. Silence, they assume, signals submission. You notice the difference in a break room one afternoon. Two colleagues are leaning against the counter, discussing a senior manager. Their voices carry the casual confidence of people who believe they are speaking safely. "He has no idea what he's doing," one of them says, shaking their head. The other laughs and begins describing a mistake the manager made during a recent presentation. The story grows longer, sharper. They glance at you only once, and the glance contains no caution, just acknowledgement. Then the conversation continues. This is the moment where many observers misunderstand the situation. They believe silence eliminates influence. Machiavelli would have recognized the opposite. When people believe someone has no leverage, they relax their defenses. Ambition becomes visible. Resentment becomes audible. Information begins to move freely. The room feels safer because the silent presence appears politically irrelevant, so conversations expand. Later that week, you see another example. A colleague sits across from you after a meeting, scrolling through their phone while continuing a quiet complaint about the same manager. This time, the frustration becomes more detailed. Specific decisions, specific names. The tone is confident, almost careless, because the assumption is now stable. You are simply the quiet one, someone who listens but never acts. Hours later, your phone vibrates. A message appears from another coworker, a short line referencing the same manager. Did you hear what they were saying earlier? They assume you noticed. They assume you heard everything, but they also assume something else. That silence means neutrality. That observation means detachment. They cannot see the accumulation forming quietly beneath these moments. Every complaint, every careless remark, every ambition revealed without calculation. Nothing is challenged, nothing is repeated, nothing is repeated, nothing is denied. The room has accepted a comforting story. You are harmless. And because that story reduces tension, people continue behaving as if it were true. What they do not notice is that their comfort has already changed the balance of information around you. They speak freely now, more freely than they should, and every conversation leaves something behind, an observation, a motive, a quiet record, none of it acknowledged, none of it corrected, but all of it remembered. Time passes. Weeks turn into months. The quiet pattern you created never disappears, but the environment around it slowly changes. At first, people treated your silence as harmless. Conversations flowed freely. Opinions were shared with confidence. Criticism traveled through the room without hesitation. But memory has a way of altering perception, especially when nothing you heard was ever corrected. One afternoon, you step into an office where two colleagues are speaking near the window. They are mid-sentence. The moment they notice you enter, the conversation stops. Not dramatically, just a brief interruption. One of them clears their throat and begins again, but the sentence they finish is different from the one they started. You recognize the shift immediately. They realized something that took time to surface. Every remark they made in your presence still exists somewhere in your memory, and they cannot confirm whether you forgot. People initially assume silence means inattention, but attention without response produces a delayed effect. Eventually, others begin wondering how much was actually observed. You see it again during a meeting a few weeks later. The discussion moves toward a decision about resources for the next quarter. Someone begins criticizing the strategy behind the current plan. Their tone carries the confidence of someone who has complained about this before. Halfway through the sentence, they notice you watching. The tone changes. Suddenly, the criticism softens. It's not that the idea is bad, it's just maybe we should look at some other options. The adjustment is subtle, but it reveals the shift taking place. Silence once created comfort. Now it creates calculation, because the room has begun to understand something Machiavelli described long before modern workplaces existed. Information inside a group rarely distributes evenly. Most people reveal themselves constantly. Opinions, ambitions, frustrations. They expose pieces of their position every time they speak. But when one participant reveals nothing, the balance becomes uneven. Over time, the asymmetry grows. Others feel it, even if they cannot explain it. So they begin trying to restore equilibrium. Not through confrontation, through curiosity. You notice the question appearing more often now. It sounds casual, almost friendly. What do you actually think about all this? Someone asks it after a meeting while walking down the hallway. You respond with a small acknowledgement, but no clear answer. The next time it happens is during lunch. A colleague leans back in their chair and repeats the same question, this time with a faint smile. So seriously, what's your take on everything going on here? They are not seeking advice. They are searching for alignment, because people feel safer when positions are visible. Agreement allows alliances. Disagreement defines opponents. But silence refuses both. Weeks later, the question appears again. Different person, same tone. What do you actually think? By now, the pattern is clear. The room is trying to recover the signal it lost months ago. They want to map your position inside the hierarchy. They want to know whether you stand with them or against them. But every time the question appears, the answer remains absent. No declaration, no allegiance. Just the same quiet observation that started the entire pattern. And with each unanswered question, the uncertainty surrounding you grows slightly heavier. Months pass, and the pattern that once appeared in isolated moments begins to merge into something larger. Different environments, different groups. The same quiet disturbance. You notice it most clearly during a group dinner one evening, a long table in a crowded restaurant. Plates arrive, glasses clink, conversation spreads across the table in several directions at once. Work stories, travel plans, small jokes moving back and forth between people. At first, the rhythm feels natural, then something subtle begins happening. When you lean slightly forward, listening to a conversation happening 3 seats away, the tone changes. Someone who was confidently criticizing a coworker suddenly softens their language. Another person shifts the topic entirely. Moments later, you turn your attention to a different part of the table. The original conversation resumes behind you. No one announces the adjustment, but the pattern becomes visible if you watch closely. Speech flows freely when attention feels diffuse, but the moment your silence enters the exchange, the atmosphere recalibrates. Most people believe influence requires visibility. They imagine authority belongs to whoever leads discussions, whoever speaks with the most confidence, whoever dominates the room through volume and certainty. But the room itself begins revealing something else. Influence also appears when people start regulating themselves in your presence. Later in the evening, someone begins telling a story about a disagreement at work. The tone is sharp, almost mocking. Halfway through the sentence, their eyes meet yours. They stop, just for a second. Then the sentence changes direction. But honestly, it wasn't that serious. No one challenged them. No argument appeared. Yet the correction arrives instantly, because over time, something about silence transforms. At first it looked harmless, then it became ambiguous. Now it feels like observation, and observation alters behavior even when no judgment is spoken. Machiavelli understood this long before modern workplaces or social circles existed. Power does not always operate through commands. Often it appears through perception. When people believe they are being observed by someone whose position they cannot calculate, they begin managing their own behavior. Speech becomes careful. Criticism becomes quieter. Jokes soften before they finish forming. Because the group cannot predict how the silent presence might interpret what it hears, the evening continues. Conversations scatter across the table again. Someone orders another round of drinks. Laughter returns. But beneath the surface, a subtle layer of caution now exists. You hear it later while standing near the entrance, as people prepare to leave. 2 acquaintances are speaking a few feet away, their voices lowered slightly. One of them nods in your direction. That guy, he's quiet. The other watches you for a moment before responding. Yeah. A pause follows. Then the second voice adds something more carefully. I think he's calculating. You never claimed calculation. You never declared strategy. You simply remained silent in moments where others rushed to react. But over time, the pattern forced people to construct explanations. Mysterious, observant, calculating. Each explanation attempts to solve the same unresolved question. What does the silence actually mean? The answer has never been offered. And because it was never offered, the room continues adjusting itself around an intention it cannot see. The gathering continues long after you decide to leave. Voices overlap behind you as you stand from the table. Chairs scrape lightly against the floor. Someone raises their glass in the middle of another story. You say very little. A short acknowledgement, a quiet goodbye. Nothing dramatic. As you step away from the group, one person glances toward you, not with suspicion, with uncertainty. The look lasts only a moment, but the question inside it is clear. What did you notice? You walk toward the door while the conversations continue behind you. Laughter returns to the table. Someone resumes the story that was interrupted. From the outside, nothing has changed. People still talk. They still argue, joke, complain, speculate. The same rhythms repeat everywhere: offices, friendships, crowded rooms filled with casual conversation. But something about your presence has already altered those rhythms. Because silence was never the absence they believed it was. It was a space, and spaces inside human hierarchies rarely stay empty. Machiavelli understood that men reveal themselves most freely when they believe observation carries no consequence. Words spill easily when the room feels safe. But when a person refuses to declare allegiance, when they do not agree, do not oppose, do not laugh on command, the space around them becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability changes behavior. The ones who speak often believe they are controlling the conversation, yet each sentence reveals position, ambition, resentment, alliance. Every word places them somewhere inside the hierarchy. Silence does the opposite. It collects. Patterns form quietly over time. Who criticizes when authority is absent? Who flatters when power enters the room? Who laughs first when someone becomes the target? You never announce these patterns, you never explain them, but the group senses something accumulating. Days later, your phone lights up with a message. Someone from that same gathering. The text arrives casually. Hey, what did you think about everything the other night? The delay is interesting. Hours have passed. Maybe a full day. The conversation is already over, yet the question remains unsettled. They still want the signal that never appeared. Agreement, disapproval, any indication of where you stand. But the answer never arrives, because the silence was never a temporary choice. It became a position. Long before you noticed it, the room had already classified you. The quiet one, the observer, the person who listens without confirming anything. And once that classification forms, something else becomes clear. You cannot easily return to the rhythm everyone else lives inside, the rhythm of immediate reactions, quick loyalties, visible alignment. Because the moment you withheld those signals, the equilibrium of every room you entered shifted slightly, not through confrontation, not through authority, through absence. And now every group you walk into eventually confronts the same quiet uncertainty, not whether you are listening, but what your silence actually means.